March 7th, 1945 dawned gray and cold along the Rhine River, but Major Wilhelm Krauss of the Wehrmacht's 7th Army couldn't shake the feeling that something momentous was about to unfold. From his concrete bunker overlooking the muddy waters near Remagen, he watched through his field glasses as American forces gathered on the western bank like storm clouds preparing to unleash their fury. What he didn't know, what none of the German defenders knew, was that the Americans possessed a revolutionary amphibious vehicle that would soon turn the tide of the war in ways no military strategist had anticipated. The DUKW, affectionately nicknamed the Duck by Allied forces, represented one of World War II's most ingenious yet secretive innovations. Born from the brilliant mind of yacht designer Rod Stevens, Jr., and developed by General Motors, this six-wheeled amphibious truck could seamlessly transition from land to water operations, carrying 25 fully equipped soldiers or 5,000 pounds of supplies across rivers that had previously seemed insurmountable barriers to military advancement. Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell of the United States Third Army's Engineering Corps stood among the reeds, his weathered hands clutching classified documents that detailed Operation Plunder, the massive Allied crossing of the Rhine. The plans called for the deployment of over 300 DUKW vehicles, but German intelligence had failed to detect their presence despite months of meticulous preparation. The element of surprise would prove crucial in the coming hours. As morning mist rose from the Rhine's surface, German machine gun nests and artillery positions prepared for what they assumed would be a conventional river crossing, using pontoon bridges and assault boats. Oberst Heinrich Zimmermann, commanding the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division's river defenses, had positioned his forces according to standard defensive doctrine, expecting American engineers to spend precious hours constructing temporary bridges under heavy fire. The Americans had indeed brought conventional crossing equipment, Bailey bridges, storm boats, and pontoons, but these served primarily as decoys to mask their true intentions. Hidden beneath camouflage nets in wooded areas several miles from the riverbank, hundreds of DUKW vehicles waited like sleeping leviathans, their crews conducting final equipment checks and reviewing tactical maps by lamplight. Reference: this historical context draws from declassified U.S. Army Corps of Engineers reports from the National Archives, documenting the strategic deployment of amphibious vehicles during Rhine crossing operations. Sergeant Thomas O'Brien from Boston had trained extensively with his DUKW crew throughout the winter months, but nothing could have prepared him for the magnitude of what lay ahead. His vehicle, designated Lucky Lady, bore the scars of previous operations in Normandy and the Ardennes, yet her twin propellers and waterproof hull remained in perfect working condition. The 20-year-old sergeant knew that within hours, he would be piloting his mechanical marvel across one of Europe's most heavily defended river barriers. German reconnaissance aircraft had photographed American positions repeatedly throughout February and early March, but the DUKW vehicles remained invisible to aerial observation. Their olive-drab paint schemes blended seamlessly with the surrounding countryside, while their low profiles when parked made them virtually indistinguishable from standard military trucks. This deception would prove instrumental in achieving tactical surprise. As dawn approached, radio operators on both sides of the Rhine transmitted final communications to their respective commands. The stage was set for a confrontation that would demonstrate how technological innovation, when combined with strategic deception, could overcome even the most formidable defensive positions in warfare history. The Rhine had served as Germany's natural fortress for centuries, its swift currents and steep embankments providing protection against countless invasions throughout European history. By 1945, the German High Command had transformed this ancient barrier into a modern defensive masterpiece, bristling with anti-tank guns, concrete pillboxes, and interlocking fields of fire that could theoretically stop any conventional assault force. Major General Matthew Ridgway of the 18th Airborne Corps understood the challenges facing his forces better than most Allied commanders. Intelligence reports indicated that German defenders had positioned themselves to repel traditional river crossings, but Ridgway possessed knowledge that would soon render their preparations obsolete. The DUKW vehicles represented more than innovative engineering. They embodied a completely new approach to amphibious warfare that German military doctrine had never contemplated. Development of the DUKW had begun in 1941, when the United States Navy recognized the need for vehicles capable of delivering supplies directly from ships to shore without requiring established harbor facilities. The resulting design incorporated the chassis of a standard 2.5-ton truck with a watertight hull, creating a hybrid vehicle that could achieve 6 miles per hour in water and 50 miles per hour on land. Captain Friedrich Weber commanded a company of the 6th Parachute Division positioned along the Rhine's eastern bank near Wesel. His men had spent months constructing defensive positions designed to channel attacking forces into predetermined killing zones, but their preparations focused entirely on repelling assault boats and preventing bridge construction. The possibility of vehicles emerging directly from the river itself had never entered their strategic calculations. American forces had learned valuable lessons about the DUKW's capabilities during Pacific theater operations, particularly during the Marshall Islands campaign, where these versatile vehicles had proven instrumental in establishing beachheads on heavily defended atolls. European commanders recognized that the Rhine crossing presented similar challenges on a vastly larger scale, requiring coordination between thousands of vehicles and tens of thousands of troops. The psychological impact of the DUKW's amphibious capabilities extended beyond mere tactical advantages. German soldiers had been conditioned to view rivers as natural defensive barriers that would delay Allied advances for days or weeks, while engineers constructed crossing points under fire. The sudden appearance of fully loaded trucks emerging from deep water would shatter these assumptions and create confusion throughout enemy defensive positions. Reference: Technical specifications and operational history detailed in the U.S. Army Transportation Corps' official wartime documentation provide comprehensive insight into DUKW deployment strategies. Technical Sergeant Maria Rodriguez from New Mexico had become one of the war's few female DUKW drivers, having proven her mechanical expertise during training exercises in Louisiana's Bayou Country. Her vehicle carried specialized radio equipment that would coordinate the massive crossing operation, but she understood that success depended entirely on maintaining the element of surprise until the last possible moment. German defensive plans assumed that American forces would require several hours to establish viable crossing points, providing ample time for reinforcements to arrive from reserve positions. However, DUKW vehicles could deliver entire infantry companies to the eastern bank within minutes, establishing multiple footholds simultaneously across a front stretching dozens of miles along the Rhine's length. The weather forecast called for continued overcast conditions with occasional rain showers, perfect conditions for concealing the movement of hundreds of amphibious vehicles toward their launch positions. American meteorologists had been tracking atmospheric conditions for weeks, waiting for optimal circumstances that would provide maximum concealment while maintaining acceptable visibility for navigation across the treacherous river currents. As night fell on March 7th, the final preparations began in earnest, setting the stage for one of World War II's most decisive yet lesser-known tactical innovations. March 8, 1945 brought an eerie stillness to the Rhine Valley as dawn broke through persistent cloud cover, casting long shadows across the water's surface where history would soon unfold. German sentries peered through morning mist, their binoculars scanning the western bank for signs of the massive Allied assault they knew must come. Yet they remained completely unaware that hundreds of amphibious vehicles were already moving into position just beyond their line of sight. General Major Kurt Meyer, commanding Army Group B's river defenses, had received intelligence reports throughout the night indicating increased Allied activity along multiple sectors of the Rhine front. His staff officers plotted enemy movements on detailed maps, tracking conventional military units while remaining oblivious to the revolutionary amphibious force that would soon render their carefully prepared defensive positions largely irrelevant. The DUKW's unique design characteristics made it ideally suited for the Rhine crossing mission. Its propeller-driven propulsion system could navigate swift currents that would swamp traditional assault boats, while its six-wheel drive capability allowed immediate transition to land operations without requiring specialized beaching equipment. Each vehicle could carry 25 combat-ready troops or equivalent cargo loads, multiplying Allied assault capabilities exponentially. Lieutenant Hans Kruger of the 116th Panzer Division had positioned his anti-tank gun crew overlooking a bend in the river where intelligence suggested American engineers might attempt bridge construction. His weapon could penetrate any known Allied armored vehicle. But the 17-year-old officer had never encountered targets that approached from underwater before emerging as fully operational land vehicles. American deception operations had been remarkably successful in concealing the DUKW deployment from German reconnaissance efforts. Dummy vehicles constructed from wood and canvas created false concentrations of conventional equipment, while actual amphibious trucks remained hidden beneath carefully constructed camouflage nets that rendered them invisible to aerial photography and ground observation. The psychological preparation of Allied troops had been equally important to the operation's success. Soldiers who had never seen amphibious vehicles before their Rhine crossing training initially expressed skepticism about the DUKW's capabilities, but extensive exercises had demonstrated the vehicle's reliability and effectiveness in riverine operations. Confidence levels among assault troops had risen dramatically as deployment day approached. Reference: operational records from the British Second Army's Intelligence Section, archived at the Imperial War Museum, provide detailed accounts of German defensive preparations along the Rhine during early 1945. Corporal David Kim from California had emigrated from Korea as a child, and now found himself preparing to pilot a DUKW across the same river where his ancestors had never imagined their descendant would participate in European warfare. His vehicle, nicknamed Pacific Express, carried specialized communications equipment that would establish contact between landing forces and artillery support positions on the western bank. German defensive doctrine emphasized the importance of controlling river crossings through concentrated firepower and rapid counterattack capabilities. However, these tactics assumed that attacking forces would require substantial time to establish viable footholds on the eastern bank, providing defenders with opportunities to mass their reserves against specific crossing points. The DUKW's ability to deliver troops directly to multiple locations simultaneously would overwhelm this defensive strategy. Weather conditions remained favorable for the amphibious assault as morning progressed. Light rain reduced visibility, while providing sufficient concealment for vehicle movements toward launch positions. River currents, though swift, fell within acceptable parameters for DUKW operations, and intelligence reports indicated minimal German patrol activity along target sectors of the eastern bank. Radio communications between Allied units increased dramatically as H-hour approached, but German monitoring stations failed to detect any references to amphibious operations. American communication security protocols had been meticulously maintained throughout the preparation phase, ensuring that enemy forces would receive no advance warning of the revolutionary assault tactics about to be employed against their positions. The stage was now set for a demonstration of military innovation that would forever change the nature of river crossing operations. At precisely 0630 hours on March 8, 1945, the first wave of DUKW vehicles slipped into the Rhine's dark waters with barely a splash, their crews maintaining radio silence as they began the most ambitious amphibious river crossing in military history. From his observation post 3 miles downstream, Hauptmann Ernst Richter of the 11th SS Panzer Division noticed what appeared to be debris floating on the current, unaware that he was witnessing the beginning of an assault that would shatter German defensive lines within hours. The lead DUKW, commanded by Staff Sergeant William Thompson from Ohio, carried a 12-man reconnaissance team tasked with establishing communication links between landing forces and supporting artillery positions. Thompson had participated in similar operations during the Normandy invasion, but crossing the Rhine presented unique challenges due to the river's swift current and the dense concentration of German defensive positions along the eastern bank. German machine gun crews positioned in reinforced bunkers maintained their vigilance, scanning the western bank for signs of conventional assault boats or engineering equipment. Their training had emphasized the importance of preventing bridge construction and destroying any watercraft attempting to cross the river, but they had received no instructions regarding vehicles that might emerge directly from the water onto dry land. The DUKW's 6-wheel drive system had been specifically designed for transitions between aquatic and terrestrial operations. Once the vehicles reached the eastern bank, their wheels would engage automatically, allowing them to climb steep embankments and navigate rough terrain that would stop conventional trucks. This capability would prove crucial in establishing multiple footholds along the German defensive line. Colonel Heinrich Braun commanded the 2nd Parachute Regiment sector of the Rhine defenses, his forces positioned according to standard defensive doctrine that anticipated several hours of advance warning before enemy troops could reach his positions. Intelligence reports throughout the previous week had indicated massive Allied preparations for a river crossing, but German analysts had failed to identify the specific nature of the approaching assault. American artillery had been registering target coordinates along the eastern bank for days, creating detailed fire plans that would support the amphibious assault once it began. However, these preparations deliberately avoided targeting areas where DUKW vehicles would make their initial landings, maintaining the element of surprise while providing covering fire for subsequent waves of assault troops. Reference: combat records from the U.S. 9th Army's operational archives, housed at the Army Heritage and Education Center, document the detailed planning and execution of Rhine crossing operations using amphibious vehicles. Technical Sergeant Robert Jackson from Georgia piloted DUKW No. 274, carrying a full squad of infantry along with specialized river crossing equipment. His vehicle had been modified with additional armor plating around the driver's compartment, providing protection against small arms fire while maintaining the vessel's amphibious capabilities. Jackson's crew had trained extensively in night operations, preparing for the possibility that weather conditions might require crossing in darkness. The river's current proved stronger than anticipated, requiring DUKW drivers to adjust their approach angles to compensate for lateral drift during the crossing. However, the vehicle's powerful engines and efficient propeller systems maintained adequate forward progress, and the first wave remained on schedule despite challenging hydraulic conditions. Navigation proved accurate due to careful reconnaissance and detailed current charts prepared by Army engineers. German observation posts reported increased activity along the western bank, but failed to identify the nature of the Allied preparations. Morning mist and persistent cloud cover provided excellent concealment for the amphibious vehicles, while carefully orchestrated artillery demonstrations in adjacent sectors drew enemy attention away from actual crossing sites. As the first DUKW vehicles approached the halfway point of their river crossing, their crews prepared for the most dangerous phase of the operation. Emerging from the water onto a hostile shore, defended by experienced German troops who had spent months preparing for exactly this moment, though they remained unaware of the revolutionary tactics about to be employed against them. The success or failure of the entire Rhine crossing operation now depended on the next few critical minutes. At 06:53 hours, Staff Sergeant Thompson's DUKW emerged from the Rhine's murky waters like a mechanical sea monster, its wheels engaging the muddy eastern bank as 12 American soldiers leaped from the vehicle with weapons ready. For Gefreiter Klaus Hoffmann, a 19-year-old machine gunner positioned in a concrete bunker 50 meters from the shoreline, the sight defied all military logic. Trucks simply did not emerge from deep water carrying fully equipped infantry squads. The psychological impact on German defenders proved immediate and devastating. Obergefreiter Johann Müller, commanding a mortar position overlooking the river, watched in stunned disbelief as a second DUKW appeared through the morning mist, followed by a third, then a fourth. His training had prepared him to engage assault boats and prevent bridge construction, but nothing in Wehrmacht doctrine addressed the sudden appearance of motor vehicles emerging directly from water onto dry land. Within minutes, 23 DUKW vehicles had successfully crossed the Rhine and established a secure beachhead spanning nearly 2 kilometers of the eastern bank. Each vehicle disgorged its human cargo with practiced efficiency, transforming from naval vessel to land transport in seconds. The German defensive line, designed to channel attacking forces into predetermined killing zones, found itself bypassed entirely by an assault method that military planners had never anticipated. Major Wilhelm Krause, monitoring the situation from his command bunker, attempted to coordinate defensive fire against the mysterious vehicles, but his artillery observers struggled to provide accurate targeting data for weapons that seemed to materialize from the river itself. Radio communications became increasingly frantic as German units reported impossible sightings of American trucks operating in areas that should have been accessible only to watercraft. The DUKW's versatility proved crucial during the initial assault phase. Vehicles carrying infantry quickly unloaded their passengers and returned to the river to ferry additional troops and supplies. while others remained on land to provide mobile fire support for the expanding beachhead. This flexibility allowed American forces to adapt rapidly to changing tactical situations as German resistance stiffened. American forces had rehearsed their river crossing procedures extensively during winter training exercises in England, but actual combat conditions presented unexpected challenges. Swift currents caused some vehicles to land several hundred meters from their intended positions, requiring rapid tactical adjustments as squad leaders reorganized their forces under enemy fire. Nevertheless, the overall assault proceeded according to plan. Reference: after-action reports filed by Rhine crossing participants preserved in the Combined Arms Research Library digital archives provide detailed first-hand accounts of DUKW operations during this critical phase of the European campaign. Private First Class Anthony Rossi from New York had never imagined that his pre-war experience as a boat mechanic would prove valuable in military service, but his technical knowledge of marine propulsion systems made him an invaluable DUKW crew member. His vehicle had suffered minor engine damage during the crossing but remained operational, allowing him to deliver critical radio equipment to forward positions on the eastern bank. German counterattack procedures emphasized rapid response to river crossing attempts, but established doctrine assumed that enemy forces would require substantial time to consolidate their positions after reaching the eastern bank. The DUKW's ability to deliver fully equipped units directly to their objective areas compressed this timeline dramatically, leaving German commanders with insufficient opportunity to coordinate effective countermeasures. Artillery fire from American positions on the western bank provided crucial support for the amphibious assault, but DUKW commanders maintained strict radio discipline to prevent enemy forces from identifying their vehicles' positions through signal intercepts. Communication between landing forces relied primarily on visual signals and predetermined rally points established during the extensive planning phase. As morning progressed, the initial shock of the DUKW assault began to wear off among German defenders, but the damage to their defensive coherence had already been done. Multiple penetrations along the Rhine front created gaps that American forces exploited rapidly, expanding their footholds before enemy reserves could arrive to seal the breaches created by this revolutionary amphibious assault. The success of the first wave now enabled larger-scale crossing operations to begin. By 0800 hours, over 100 DUKW vehicles had successfully crossed the Rhine, transforming what German commanders had expected to be a prolonged siege into a rapidly expanding amphibious assault that threatened to collapse their entire defensive line. General Oberst Johannes Blaskowitz, commanding Army Group H, received increasingly desperate reports from subordinate units describing American trucks emerging from the river at multiple locations along a front extending nearly 40 kilometers. The tactical flexibility of DUKW operations proved decisive in maintaining the assault's momentum. As German forces attempted to concentrate their defenses against established beachheads, additional amphibious vehicles appeared at unexpected locations, forcing enemy commanders to disperse their reserves across an impossibly wide front. This strategic dispersion prevented effective counterattacks while allowing American forces to consolidate their positions methodically. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell had anticipated German confusion during the initial assault phase, but the actual level of defensive disruption exceeded his most optimistic projections. Radio intercepts revealed growing panic among enemy units as field commanders struggled to understand how American motor vehicles had penetrated positions that should have been accessible only to infantry or light watercraft. German military doctrine simply had no provisions for combating amphibious trucks. The second wave of DUKW vehicles carried heavy weapons and ammunition that transformed the American beachheads from vulnerable footholds into formidable defensive positions. Each vehicle could transport a 75mm recoilless rifle with crew and ammunition, or equivalent loads of mortars, machine guns, and anti-tank weapons. This rapid delivery of firepower allowed landing forces to establish defensive perimeters capable of repelling German counterattacks. Hauptmann Weber's paratroop company attempted to launch a coordinated assault against the nearest American position, but his attack faltered when DUKW vehicles delivered reinforcements faster than German forces could advance across open ground. The psychological advantage had shifted decisively to the American side, as German soldiers realized they faced an enemy capable of seemingly impossible tactical maneuvers. Weather conditions continued to favor Allied operations, as cloud cover persisted throughout the morning, concealing the movement of additional DUKW waves from German observation posts and artillery spotters. The combination of poor visibility and revolutionary assault tactics created a tactical situation that German defensive planning had never contemplated, leaving enemy forces struggling to adapt their responses to unprecedented circumstances. Reference: Strategic assessments compiled by the German Army Historical Section, captured by Allied intelligence officers and subsequently declassified, reveal the extent of confusion created by amphibious vehicle operations along the Rhine front. Sergeant O'Brien's Lucky Lady had completed 3 round trips across the Rhine by mid-morning, delivering 67 soldiers and 2 tons of critical supplies to the expanding beachhead. His vehicle bore fresh bullet holes from German small arms fire, but the DUKW's robust construction and redundant systems allowed continued operations despite combat damage. O'Brien's crew had developed considerable expertise in rapid loading and unloading procedures during their previous crossings. German artillery attempts to target DUKW operations proved largely ineffective due to the vehicle's mobility and the difficulty of predicting their movements. Traditional artillery fire control procedures assumed that targets would remain stationary long enough for accurate range estimation, but amphibious trucks could change position rapidly, both in water and on land, complicating targeting calculations significantly. The success of individual DUKW vehicles depended heavily on crew training and mechanical reliability. American maintenance procedures emphasized preventive care and rapid field repairs, ensuring that the maximum number of vehicles remained operational throughout extended combat operations. Spare parts and technical expertise were readily available at staging areas on the western bank, supporting sustained amphibious operations. As the morning progressed, German resistance began to stiffen as enemy commanders adapted their tactics to address the unprecedented threat posed by amphibious vehicles. However, the initial psychological and tactical advantages gained during the surprise assault had already created irreversible changes in the strategic situation along the Rhine front. The third wave of DUKW vehicles was now preparing to launch, carrying specialized equipment that would further expand American capabilities on the eastern bank. Oberst Heinrich Zimmermann had commanded defensive positions along the Rhine for 8 months, but nothing in his extensive military experience had prepared him for the tactical challenges presented by American amphibious vehicles that seemed to materialize from the river at will. By 0930 hours on March 8th, his 15th Panzer Grenadier Division had lost contact with 7 forward observation posts, not through conventional assault, but through the inexplicable appearance of enemy forces in areas that should have been completely inaccessible to mechanized units. German adaptation to the DUKW threat began with attempts to establish new defensive positions farther inland, abandoning the waterline fortifications that had proven ineffective against amphibious assault. However, this tactical withdrawal created gaps in the defensive line that additional waves of American vehicles exploited ruthlessly, landing fresh troops and supplies at an unprecedented rate that overwhelmed German response capabilities. Major General Ridgway observed the expanding assault from his command post on the western bank, monitoring radio communications that revealed the growing success of the amphibious operation. Intelligence reports indicated that German forces were attempting to redeploy their reserves to address multiple penetrations, but the speed and unpredictability of DUKW operations prevented effective coordination of enemy countermeasures. The technological superiority of American amphibious vehicles became increasingly apparent as combat conditions intensified. While German forces struggled to move heavy weapons across difficult terrain to new defensive positions, DUKW vehicles delivered equivalent firepower directly to forward positions within minutes. This mobility advantage proved decisive in establishing fire superiority at critical points along the expanding perimeter. Hauptmann Friedrich Weber's remaining paratroopers attempted to establish an ambush position along what appeared to be a logical route for American vehicle movement. But DUKW operations followed no predictable patterns. The vehicle's ability to transition seamlessly between land and water operations meant that they could appear from unexpected directions, bypass traditional choke points, and disappear back into the river before defensive fire could be effectively coordinated. Artillery coordination between German units deteriorated rapidly, as communication lines were severed by the fluid nature of the amphibious assault. Forward observers found themselves isolated, as American forces appeared behind their positions, while battery commanders struggled to provide fire support without accurate target information. The traditional defensive coordination that had characterized German river defenses collapsed under the pressure of unprecedented tactical circumstances. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez had transported 4 loads of critical supplies across the Rhine by late morning, her radio-equipped DUKW serving as a mobile communication center that coordinated landing operations across a 12-kilometer front. Her vehicle's sophisticated electronics allowed real-time coordination between scattered American units while maintaining contact with artillery support on the western bank. German attempts to establish new defensive lines proved futile, as DUKW vehicles continued to appear at unexpected locations, delivering fresh troops and supplies that maintained the assault's momentum. The psychological impact on enemy morale became increasingly evident as German soldiers realized they faced a tactically superior enemy, employing weapons and techniques that their training had never addressed. The cumulative effect of sustained DUKW operations created cascading failures throughout the German defensive system. Individual unit collapses created gaps that American forces exploited immediately, while the speed of the amphibious assault prevented effective coordination between adjacent defensive sectors. What had begun as localized tactical surprises evolved into strategic penetrations that threatened the entire Rhine defensive line. By midday, German commanders faced a tactical situation that military doctrine had never contemplated: an enemy force capable of delivering mechanized units to any point along a river barrier without requiring conventional crossing equipment. The fundamental assumptions underlying Rhine defensive planning had been invalidated by American technological innovation and tactical creativity. The 4th wave of DUKW vehicles was now crossing the river, carrying specialized bridging equipment that would soon establish permanent connections between the two banks. March 8, 1945 would be remembered as the day when military innovation decisively overcame traditional defensive doctrine, but for the German soldiers fighting desperately to contain the American breakthrough, the immediate reality was one of chaos and tactical confusion as DUKW vehicles continued to deliver fresh troops and supplies at locations their commanders had deemed impossible to reach. By noon, over 250 amphibious vehicles had successfully crossed the Rhine, establishing multiple consolidated beachheads that threatened to merge into a continuous American presence on the eastern bank. General Major Meyer's attempts to coordinate a large-scale counterattack foundered on the fundamental problem that his forces could not predict where additional American units might appear. Traditional military planning relied on understanding enemy capabilities and likely courses of action, but the DUKW vehicles had introduced variables that German doctrine had never considered. How could defensive positions be established against an enemy that could appear anywhere along dozens of kilometers of riverbank? The strategic implications of the successful Rhine crossing extended far beyond immediate tactical considerations. Allied intelligence had monitored German communications throughout the morning, noting increasing references to withdrawal and regrouping rather than counterattack and containment. The psychological impact of the amphibious assault had clearly exceeded its physical effects, creating a crisis of confidence among enemy commanders who had believed the Rhine barrier to be impregnable. American engineering units had begun constructing conventional bridges at several crossing sites, but the DUKW operations had already achieved the primary objective of establishing secure footholds on the eastern bank. The amphibious vehicles continued to provide logistical support for the expanding American presence, while conventional construction proceeded under the protection of forces delivered by the revolutionary assault craft. Lieutenant Kim's Pacific Express had suffered mechanical problems during its 6th crossing, but remained operational thanks to field repairs performed by his crew during a brief halt on the eastern bank. The DUKW's modular design and standardized components allowed rapid maintenance even under combat conditions, ensuring maximum vehicle availability throughout sustained operations. German resistance began to collapse systematically as individual unit commanders realized their positions had become untenable. The combination of tactical surprise, technological superiority, and sustained pressure had created conditions that traditional defensive measures could not address effectively. Reports of German withdrawals reached Allied intelligence stations with increasing frequency as the day progressed. Reference: operational summaries prepared by Allied intelligence teams during the Rhine crossing operations, preserved in the Eisenhower Presidential Library archives, document the comprehensive nature of German defensive failures during this critical period. The versatility of DUKW operations proved crucial in maintaining the assault's momentum, despite stiffening German resistance. Vehicles could transition rapidly between transport, fire support, and evacuation roles as tactical conditions changed, providing American commanders with unprecedented flexibility in responding to enemy countermeasures. This adaptability allowed continuous pressure on German forces while minimizing American casualties. Artillery support from the Western Bank had been instrumental in suppressing German defensive fire during the critical initial phase of the crossing. But the success of DUKW operations soon made this support less crucial. American forces on the Eastern Bank could now provide their own fire support using weapons and ammunition delivered by the amphibious vehicles, reducing dependence on long-range artillery coordination. Communication security had been maintained throughout the crossing operations despite intensive German efforts to intercept Allied radio transmissions. DUKW crews used predetermined code words and frequency changes that prevented enemy forces from gaining tactical intelligence about ongoing operations, contributing significantly to the sustained element of surprise that characterized the entire assault. By afternoon, German commanders faced the inevitable conclusion that the Rhine defensive line had been irreparably compromised. The success of American amphibious operations had created conditions that could not be restored through conventional military measures, forcing strategic decisions that would have profound implications for the remaining months of the European war. The final wave of DUKW vehicles was now preparing to cross, carrying heavy equipment that would complete the transformation of the Eastern Bank into a secure American base of operations. As the sun set on March 8, 1945, the Rhine River reflected the glow of burning German equipment abandoned during the hasty withdrawal of forces that had once considered the waterway an impregnable barrier. The successful deployment of DUKW amphibious vehicles had accomplished in 12 hours what conventional military planners had estimated would require weeks of costly preparation and assault, fundamentally altering the strategic balance on the Western Front and demonstrating how technological innovation could overcome seemingly insurmountable defensive advantages. The statistical evidence of the operation's success spoke volumes about the revolutionary nature of amphibious vehicle warfare. Over 400 DUKW vehicles had crossed the Rhine throughout the day, delivering more than 8,000 American troops along with their complete equipment, loads to the Eastern Bank without requiring a single conventional bridge or ferry operation. German forces, designed to repel traditional river crossings, had proven completely inadequate against an assault method that their doctrine had never contemplated. Staff Sergeant Thompson's reconnaissance team, the first Americans to set foot on German soil via amphibious vehicle, had established observation posts that provided crucial intelligence for subsequent operations. Their success demonstrated how small, highly mobile units delivered by innovative means could achieve strategic effects far beyond their numerical strength, a lesson that would influence military thinking for decades to come. The psychological impact on German morale extended throughout Army Group B and beyond, as news of the impossible American river crossing spread through enemy communication networks. Soldiers who had spent months constructing elaborate defensive positions discovered that their efforts had been rendered obsolete by a tactical innovation they had never imagined possible, creating a crisis of confidence that would persist until the war's end. Major General Ridgway's post-operation assessment emphasized the decisive role of secrecy in achieving tactical surprise. The successful concealment of DUKW capabilities from German intelligence had been crucial to the operation's success, demonstrating the importance of operational security in maintaining technological advantages over enemy forces. This principle would become fundamental to future amphibious operations worldwide. The broader strategic implications of the Rhine crossing resonated throughout the Allied command structure as military leaders recognized the potential applications of amphibious vehicle technology in future conflicts. The DUKW had proven its worth not merely as a specialized piece of equipment, but as a revolutionary approach to overcoming geographical barriers that had traditionally limited military operations. Reference: post-war analysis conducted by the U.S. Army Center of Military History, published in the official history series, United States Army in World War II, provides comprehensive evaluation of the Rhine crossing operations and their lasting significance to amphibious warfare development. Technical Sergeant Rodriguez's radio-equipped DUKW had coordinated communications for the entire amphibious assault, demonstrating how specialized variants of the basic vehicle design could fulfill critical support roles while maintaining full amphibious capabilities. Her successful maintenance of communication links under combat conditions had been instrumental in the operation's tactical success, proving the value of integrated command and control systems in complex military operations. The legacy of the Rhine crossing extended far beyond World War II, as military planners worldwide studied the tactical innovations demonstrated by American forces on March 8, 1945. The principle of using amphibious vehicles to bypass traditional defensive barriers would influence everything from the Korean War to modern peacekeeping operations, establishing a tactical doctrine that remains relevant in contemporary military planning. German military historians would later acknowledge that the DUKW assault represented a fundamental failure of intelligence and imagination within their strategic planning process. The inability to anticipate or prepare for amphibious vehicle operations revealed critical weaknesses in defensive thinking that had broader implications for military doctrine in the atomic age that was rapidly approaching. As darkness fell over the Rhine Valley, American forces consolidated their positions on ground that German commanders had believed would remain in enemy hands for months to come. The success of the DUKW operations had not merely crossed a river, it had crossed a threshold into a new era of warfare where technological innovation and tactical creativity could overcome the most formidable obstacles. The humble duck trucks had proven that in modern warfare, the impossible was merely the untried, and that victory often belonged to those who dared to imagine new solutions to old problems. The Rhine had been crossed, the war would soon be won, and military history would never be the same.